When you hear the words, the wrath of God, what image forms in your mind? For many, it's one of the most terrifying concepts in all of religion. It conjures images of fiery judgment, terrifying punishment, perhaps even divine vengeance. It sounds harsh, fearsome, arguably even cruel or unfair, especially when contrasted with the idea of a loving, merciful God. It's the part of faith that many people recoil from, struggle to reconcile, or even outright reject. How can infinite love coexist with terrifying wrath? This apparent contradiction has led countless people to question the very foundation of religious belief. But what if our common understanding of divine wrath is deeply flawed? What if we are seeing only one side of a complex, paradoxical truth? What if, as the brilliant and insightful English writer and philosopher G.K. Chesterton profoundly argued, the wrath of God isn't the opposite of mercy, but is, in fact, in its deepest reality, one of mercy's most necessary and powerful forms? That statement is likely jarring. It sounds counterintuitive, perhaps even absurd at first hearing. How can something as seemingly destructive and painful as divine punishment possibly be understood as an expression of divine compassion and love? It challenges our conventional definitions of these terms and forces us to look at the nature of reality, consequence, and God's interaction with the world in a completely different light. But Chesterton, with his unparalleled ability to cut through conventional assumptions and reveal the profound sanity and surprising logic within Christian doctrine, invites us to pause. He asks us to consider that perhaps our modern, often sentimentalized or overly simplified view of reality, consequences, and even love itself has blinded us to a fundamental, even life-saving truth about the divine response to our choices and our condition. He suggests that true mercy, in certain critical moments, might look astonishingly like judgment from our limited earthly perspective. Let's delve into Chesterton's world and explore this radical, challenging, and ultimately deeply hopeful idea that transforms the terrifying concept of God's wrath into a surprising revelation of His profound mercy. To grasp Chesterton's perspective, we must first understand his view of God, humanity, and reality. Chesterton believed in a personal, loving God who created a real world with inherent laws, not just physical laws, but moral and spiritual ones. These laws are not arbitrary rules imposed from the outside. They are built into the very structure of existence, flowing from God's own nature, which is truth, goodness, and love. Sin, in this view, is not merely breaking a rule. It is acting against the fundamental reality of how things are meant to be. It's aligning ourselves with falsehood, with non-being, with destruction, rather than with truth, life, and creation. When we act against reality, for example, by attempting to defy gravity, there are built-in consequences. We fall. Gravity isn't punishing us out of malice, it's simply asserting its reality. Chesterton saw divine punishment in a similar, though infinitely more complex and personal way. When we persistently act against the moral and spiritual laws of the universe, when we build our lives on lies, when we treat others with cruelty, when we pursue paths that deny our own nature as beings made for connection and goodness, the inevitable outcome is internal decay, broken relationships, suffering, and spiritual death. Divine wrath, in Chesterton's view, is not primarily God inflicting pain from the outside as retribution. It is God allowing, or even actively bringing about, the experience of these inherent, inescapable consequences of aligning ourselves with unreality and destruction. It is the painful collision with the truth of our trajectory. Consider the analogy of a child running towards a busy road. The parent sees the imminent danger. What is the most merciful thing the parent can do? Gently call the child's name? That might work if the child is paying attention and not determined. But if the child is fixated on something, oblivious to the danger, running full speed, the parent's mercy demands a more drastic action. The parent might have to shout in a terrifying voice, causing the child's shock and fear. They might have to sprint, grab the child firmly, even painfully, pulling them back. The child might fall, scrape their knees, cry from the pain, the shock, and the frustration of being stopped. From the child's limited perspective, this feels like harsh punishment, a sudden, unpleasant force stopping their enjoyable run. But was it punishment instead of mercy? Absolutely not. The parent's action, though painful and frightening in the moment, was mercy in its most urgent, life-saving form. The momentary distress of being grabbed and falling is an act of profound love compared to the horrific alternative of being hit by a car. The parent's wrath, their strong, forceful, even seemingly violent intervention, was the necessary vehicle of their mercy. Chesterton argues that divine wrath operates on a similar principle. When humanity, individually and collectively, rushes headlong down paths of sin, denial of God, and self-destruction, the pain and suffering that result are not arbitrary acts of vengeance from a distant deity. They are the universe, and God within it, asserting the reality of truth, goodness, and life. They are the inherent, painful consequences of violating the spiritual laws of existence. The pain of loneliness after pushing people away, the emptiness after pursuing only fleeting pleasure, the brokenness after betraying trust, the internal torment of guilt and shame. These are not random misfortunes. They are often the direct, built-in results of our choices. And they are, paradoxically, expressions of God's mercy. Why are they mercy? Because they serve as a crucial, often last resort, signal. They are the spiritual equivalent of the searing pain signal when you touch a hot stove. That pain isn't the stove punishing you. It's your body, designed for survival, urgently telling you to stop an action that will cause catastrophic harm. Without the capacity for such pain, you might unknowingly destroy yourself. The pain is a gift, a life-preserving mercy. Similarly, the pain and suffering that result from our sin and rebellion are mercy because they scream at us, "Stop! This path leads to death. You are violating reality." Without the painful consequences, without experiencing the inherent brokenness that results from choosing lies over truth, hatred over love, self over others, we might continue down a path of utter destruction, blinding ourselves to the truth, hardening our hearts completely, and sealing our own doom. The pain is a wake-up call, a divine alarm clock, a desperate attempt by God's love to get our attention and turn us back before it's too late. Chesterton would say that God's wrath is not the opposite of his love or mercy. It is the fierce, protective aspect of his love. It is God's love so committed to our true well-being, to our living in alignment with the reality he created, that it will not stand idly by and watch us destroy ourselves. It is the divine confirmation that our choices have real, weighty consequences, that there is a real difference between good and evil, and that the universe is structured in such a way that aligning with evil hurts and ultimately leads to ruin. The pain of encountering God's wrath, whether through external consequences or internal conviction, is the pain of colliding with the absolute truth of God's reality. A collision intended not to annihilate us, but to shock us into turning towards the path of life. The pain is the messenger of mercy, revealing the danger and urging us to change course. It's the painful but necessary surgery that removes the cancer of sin before it consumes us entirely. It's the stern, loving parent who causes temporary distress to save the child from fatal harm. This perspective transforms divine wrath from a fearful concept into a profound, albeit challenging, expression of God's deep, unwavering, and ultimately redemptive love for his creation. A love so fierce it refuses to let us be destroyed by our own illusions and choices without a dramatic intervention. So, how does this deep, perhaps unsettling, Chestertonian idea apply to our lives, right here, right now? How can this perspective help us navigate the difficulties and consequences we face? Maybe you are currently going through a period of intense difficulty, suffering, or profound consequence that feels like a direct result of mistakes you've made, choices you've pursued, or habits you've indulged in. It could be the painful dissolution of a friendship or family relationship because of your own selfishness or harshness. It might be severe financial struggles stemming from past irresponsibility or greed. Perhaps it's dealing with the long-term health repercussions of neglecting your body or engaging in destructive behaviors. Or maybe it's the deep internal suffering of guilt, shame, and spiritual emptiness that comes from living a life disconnected from truth, meaning, or faith. These experiences are undeniably painful. They feel like you are paying a price, enduring a punishment. And in a very real sense, you are experiencing the built-in, inherent consequences of choices that went against the grain of how life is meant to be lived. Against wisdom, against goodness, perhaps against what you knew in your deepest conscience was right.
But what if, seen through Chesterton's lens, that very pain, that very consequence, that very brokenness you are experiencing is, at its core, a profound act of divine mercy? What if this suffering is precisely the loud, unavoidable shout intended to get your attention before you walk off the cliff edge of utter ruin? What if the brokenness you feel is the universe, God's reality, showing you in the most undeniable terms that the path you are on, the way you were living, the foundations you were building upon were fundamentally flawed, unstable, or actively leading towards destruction? What if this isn't primarily about God making you suffer for retribution, but God allowing you to experience the natural, painful outcome of your chosen trajectory? Precisely because He loves you too much to let you persist in a way that will ultimately lead to your complete undoing. This perspective does not diminish or excuse the pain. Suffering is real and it hurts deeply. But this view potentially imbues that suffering with profound meaning and redemptive purpose. It transforms mere hardship or regrettable consequence into a vital, albeit painful, form of communication from reality, from God. It challenges you to look beyond the immediate pain and ask, what is this suffering revealing to me about the truth? What fundamental reality have I been ignoring or violating? What painful lesson am I being given that is absolutely necessary for my long-term well-being and spiritual survival? What direction am I being clearly and undeniably called to turn away from, and what path of life, truth, and goodness am I being called back towards? Perhaps the crushing pain of loneliness and isolation after years of self-absorption and failing to invest in others is a painful mercy, finally waking you up to the fundamental human need for genuine connection, vulnerability, and sacrificial love, guiding you towards building authentic, life-giving relationships. Perhaps the profound discomfort and public humility of professional failure after taking ethical shortcuts or being lazy is a mercy, showing you, in a way nothing else could, the absolute necessity and ultimate reward of integrity, diligence, perseverance, and building on a foundation of honesty. Perhaps the persistent, nagging, intensely uncomfortable sting of conviction, that inner sense of profound guilt and shame when you are confronted with your own sin, your selfishness, your failure to live up to your own standards or God's, is not God simply being angry at you to make you feel bad. What if that painful feeling is God's mercy knocking fiercely on the door of your soul? What if the pain of conviction is the spiritual body's essential pain signal, indicating a deep wound or a spreading illness, sin, urgently prompting you to seek the only true healing remedy: confession, repentance, turning back to God, and accepting the grace and forgiveness offered through faith? Without that painful signal, you might descend further into spiritual apathy, hardening your heart and conscience to the point where return becomes increasingly difficult, if not impossible. The conviction, though agonizing to our pride and self-image, is a mercy designed to stop us in our tracks and turn us back towards life and light. This doesn't mean that every single instance of suffering we experience is a direct, one-to-one divine punishment for a specific sin. The world is broken, complex, and filled with suffering that arises from the sin of others, from natural evils, and from simply living in a fallen creation. Chesterton's insight is particularly powerful, however, when considering the suffering and painful consequences that are clearly connected, directly or indirectly, to our own choices, our own turning away from the good, and the inherent structure of reality that resists our attempts to live contrary to its design. When we find ourselves facing hardship that stems even partially from the path we have chosen, this Chestertonian view gives us a framework to understand it not just as misfortune or cold retribution, but as a potentially purposeful communication of love. It's a divine hand, firm and painful, guiding us back from danger. It transforms potential despair into an opportunity for profound introspection, radical honesty, sincere repentance, and ultimately redirection towards a life aligned with truth, goodness, and the source of all life. Embracing this perspective requires immense courage, the courage to face the truth about ourselves, even when it is unflattering or exposes our deepest flaws. It requires profound humility, admitting that our way was wrong, that our judgment was faulty, that we have fallen short of the reality God intended for us. But it offers a powerful, counterintuitive hope. It suggests that even when God seems most severe, when His reality feels most harsh in its consequences, when we feel the painful weight of our own failure, His ultimate intention is always our redemption, our healing, our correction, and our restoration to a right relationship with Him and with reality. The wrath of God is not the opposite of mercy. It is the terrible, necessary storm that clears away our illusions and reveals the true path back to safe ground and flourishing life when we are lost in the dangerous fog of our own making. It is the ultimate act of love that refuses to let us destroy ourselves without a fight, using the very consequences of our actions to call us back home.
G.K. Chesterton's idea that divine punishment can be a form of divine mercy is, as with many of his insights, a profound paradox that challenges our easy assumptions and invites us to look deeper. It transforms our understanding of suffering, consequences, conviction, and perhaps most importantly, the very character and nature of God's love, revealing it to be not merely gentle and comforting, but also fiercely committed to truth and reality, even when that commitment causes us pain. What do you think about this perspective? Does this challenging idea resonate with you on a deeper level? Does it offer a new way to think about difficult times you've experienced, particularly those tied to your own choices? How does seeing consequences not just as punitive, but as potential, painful mercies change the way you might approach facing your own struggles, failures, or moments of spiritual conviction and guilt? Have you ever experienced something incredibly painful or difficult in your life that, only in retrospect, felt like a form of divine mercy or guidance? A harsh correction that ultimately prevented a much worse outcome or set you on a profoundly better path? We would be honored to hear your thoughts and your personal reflections on this complex and vital idea. Please share your thoughts, experiences, and any questions you have in the comments below. Let's continue this exploration of Chesterton's fascinating insights together. If this video has given you something meaningful and challenging to ponder, something that has perhaps illuminated your understanding of faith or your own life experiences, please give it a like. Share it with others who might benefit from this perspective, especially those who struggle with the concept of God's wrath. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more explorations into the profound wisdom of great thinkers like G.K. Chesterton and how their timeless ideas can offer light and guidance for our faith and our lives today. Thank you for watching. May you have the courage and grace to face the truth even when it is painful. And may you discover the hidden, transformative mercy woven into the fabric of reality, always calling you back to life, truth, and the loving heart of God.